Unscannable 33.
Also, relatively high profile, overwhelming. Yeah, is it not included? Well, we've got we have a tabulated list of about 30, and then we include about 10 or 15, I think, that we mentioned we looked at, but we didn't actually find any examples. We talked about those specific conspiracy theories in terms of violence, but in another section, extremist groups which did not include conspiracy theories within them. Yeah, so therefore we weren't saying. So we weren't saying.
Highlights 9/11 right at the beginning. That's in the Guardian.
And 9/11 is a conspiracy. The 9/11 Truth Movement is a conspiracy theory. Now that.
So it's the official.
Yeah, but that.
Yeah, right. Okay. So let's immediately get into talking about whether 9/11 was an inside job, which is where it always ends up. No. But your question is about your question is about
statistics and methodology.
Yes.
Well, then how you decide what's a conspiracy? How did you data?
It would be lovely if we had data sets which would allow us to do quantitative analysis comparing different groups, but we don't. I mean, it's a content analysis, so we have to find.
Well, then you have to look at the content for the other side. What sort of official conspiracy theories or official theories?
No, hang on a second. We don't because no, we don't because we're analysing the impact of conspiracy theories on extremist groups. So we don't have to look at.
So we intentionally selected.
Well, to get statistical data, you need.
I'm saying you can't derive statistical. We didn't present statistical data in the. We didn't say statistically proven.
So you didn't do it.
No. But you can't do statistical data on a 5,000 word report that's arguing about that's trying to describe the role of conspiracy theories within extremist groups.
Okay, that answers the question. Shall we throw it over for? Questions.
Yeah, Carl, thank you for that wonderful recommendation that cultural secrecy has to go within MI5 and we should have a presumption of transparency. I hope we can all agree on that as the future that we really want to live in, okay? I think that's great. And I suggest that if your report define the term extremist a bit more so it helps us to know what you're talking about, okay? And also, as Ian has indicated, the implication that they have a link with violence, I think what we call the truth groups that we've been involved in are totally committed to the way of non-violence, and we didn't quite get what you've now explained to us, that you weren't including those groups in your overall selection of 50. I think if that could have been more clearly laid out, and your perhaps evidence, clear evidence of what you meant by groups turning to violence, that would help. I mean, I think we're all familiar with Marxist-Leninist philosophy, which did advocate violence, and I think that's a totally different thing. It belongs to a different era, and in general, I think that what you call conspiracy groups in our time, which might be called truth movement groups, don't have that connection and don't advocate it. Okay?
Can I respond to this quickly, so we don't have a huge list? I mean, the first time we mentioned the 9/11 conspiracy movement, or 9/11 truth movement in our report, is actually to mention them as an example of a non-violent group which uses conspiracy theories. I mean, I will repeat this. The 9/11 truth movement is not violent. We both went to some great lengths actually after the report, trying to manage the aftermath of the discussions, like in hammering that point home again and again and again. I actually reject the allegations that we are in some sense conniving to conflate the 9/11 truth movement with violent extremist groups in order to delegitimise the 9/11 truth movement. I think I can see where that allegations come from, but I think that's almost entirely false. And actually looking at the substance and material of our paper, you can see.
But we don't apologise for the fact that conspiracy theories of various hues are found very consistently across a wide range of ultimately terrorist groups. Okay. And they aren't normally 9/11 conspiracy theories. In fact, I don't think we found one for 9/11 specifically a 9/11 conspiracy theories, but some of the offshoots of that related to Zionist-occupied government are, and they're very prevalent.
Yeah, okay. You suggested that these groups acted to destroy trust in government on a massive scale. And I suggest you may be reversing cause and effect here, and that ordinary citizens losing their faith in government and realising that the government is lying to them over Iraq or over 9/11 has had a shattering effect in this new millennium, And that is what produces what you call conspiracy theories. So it might be the other way around. And finally, when you say they advocate a spectacular act of violence as necessary, that is normally the way we think of the neocons in American government. They actually recommended that in their project for the New American Century. A big act of violence was necessary, and 9/11 might have been it. I have not ever come across a group that you might call extremists in this country which advocated a spectacular act of violence as personally.
Well, you've hopefully not come across Al-Qaeda spokesmen, but they do. And the communications of a spectacular attack are very clear in the run-up to 9/11.
I suggest you listen to Jason Burke, who's written a book about Al-Qaeda, about the sheer extent to which Al-Qaeda is fabricated by FBI and MI5 agents as a terror image that people need to be kept in fear of, rather than being a genuine movement.
I suggest you read Lawrence Wright's The Road to 9/11, which completely and utterly disproves that point. Jason Burke's book. Wait a minute. Jason Burke's book makes what's a more legitimate point, which is that in many cases the extent of the threat can be exaggerated or used for particular ends, but that's not quite the same as saying that the entire threat is fabricated and nonsense, because that's certainly not the case.
Lady at the back.
I'm trying to remember the points that I was bringing up. First of all, the way that you're talking this evening is that you are speaking up for terrorism, but then you're dragging in the conspiracy theories with it. I belong to several peace groups, truth groups, whatever you want to call them, and none of them have any.
Yeah, we're not.
Did you hear the answer that we just
I
made?
did.
We're not claiming the 9/11
to
truth
that
movement.
point. But we responded to that point.
I suggest that you record in future what it's language, and that you aren't aware of the way that you're speaking. You know, I'm sorry if you don't like it. The other thing is that when I first put my hand up, when you were giving 3 stages, the first reaction you had was actually part 4 of what he'd been saying, the instant knee-jerk dismissal of events and the group, probably my writing, extremity shift.
Extremity shift.
Extremity shift, thank you. And that was how you were speaking. Your first point that you were making had fallen automatically into his full thing.
Yes, that's because the paper was about the role of conspiracy theories in extremist groups.
Yes.
And we wrote the paper together, so presumably we would be saying the same
But
thing.
no, I'm not saying you're not saying the same thing. But you were answering to it and saying this is what we're actually, this is what we're saying. And I can't. I mean, that's why I wanted to put my hand up and say at the time, because it would have seemed more clear.
But the recommendations we tried to make the recommendations follow directly on from what we found, so hence you would expect a bit of sort of call and answer between us on that.
But it seems that you've fallen into that same trap of number 4, which is because you're so into doing the report about it that you've sort of fallen into the extremity shift.
You're basing this on
what you just said, your reaction to something.
So group extremity shift occurs when there is a group of people that all have like a prevailing orthodox opinion. I think like purely the evidence of us being here today and engaging with lots of people, in what I hope to be a mutually respectful way, who have great umbrage with our report, shows that we're actually exposing ourselves to lots of dissent and criticism.
You could backtrack because you said close-knit groups. That's very different from groups that have the same view on something.
Well, I mean, it has to be epistemologically and rhetorically close-knit, like in the group extremity shift
Epistemologically close-knit.
So, I mean, group extremity shift happens when, in some sense, there is a break between wider conversations which have lots of dissenting opinions and groups which have one conversation or one prevailing opinion.
It's called.
No, we're not.
I wouldn't say that not. The group extremity shift that Carl's referring to is part of the sort of the orthodox literature on terrorism, which suggests that what you tend to have are smallish groups of young men that isolate themselves from their local community or their mosque or whatever, and then increasingly, by being in a relatively small group, sort of egg each other on in this one-upmanship where there's no dissenting voices to try to pull them out or to say that what you're saying is rubbish. And that's where it comes to a close-knit group. What you actually find is on the net, very frequently see it being balkanised. So you have sites that are about such and such a thing, and you have no dissenting voices whatsoever on these sites to say, actually, some of these claims that you're making are just factually inaccurate.
Well, that
and
applies
here's
in
the
the
evidence.
Conservative Party.
It applies everywhere. It applies everywhere.
Yes, that's at the end.
Okay. Hi, first of all, I'm from the politics department. I think it's very great that you actually engage and you take this. I see that you're somehow, everybody's a bit stressed in here, but we're looking for truth. So maybe we should just, first of all, give up this splitting. And also, I like very much your recommendations that you've made for greater transparency of government. My problem with your paper, as far as I've heard it, I mean, I have not really read it, of course I have to admit, I just saw this talk exists today, was that you start from the premise extremist groups use conspiracy theorists, and which of course says you're already taking a certain position of the observer who looks at information as conspiracy and at other groups as extremists. Now, I mean, the nature of every political ideology and movement that it considers all other movements as extremists or anything. The problem is with conspiracy theory, with this notion that when we see governments, today we know that there are huge PR apparatuses. We know that there are certain distortions in the media as described by maybe Lance Bennett, theory of indexing, agenda setting. So we know that there is sort of this informational instability that is created by every government, for example, using PR technologies. And on the other hand side, we really do have the government scandals as epitomized, for example, in the Watergate scandal or the Iran-Contra affair. And these are sort of official government scandals made public by the United States Congress, which would, if they hadn't been revealed, perfectly qualify as conspiracy theories. So the elections rigged, I mean, what's this crazy talk, or Iran-Contra affair, what they sell, they sell things, and drugs are being imported into the United States in order to sustain a movement. That sounds like perfect conspiracy. The problem is really that there are multiple events and there's government secrecy, and therefore actually nobody knows what is really happening because there's this fundamental dilemma of state secrecy. And of course, I guess the difference in quality is just how randomly these strands are connected. But
no, that's exactly where you're falling short, I'm afraid, my friend. I mean, if I can respond,
maybe I can finish, but of course, if you want to.
Go ahead. Finish the question. Yeah.
Okay. So there's this fundamental informational instability where you would say that if in the interest of government these things would not have been revealed and they would have always been perfect conspiracy theories. So it's really, I think, and very much what you consider that it should be on the part of government to erase this informational instability, to refrain from using PR technologies and to refrain from using government secrecy.
yeah, I mean,
Can I make a suggestion that we some of these questions will overlap? If we have 2 or 3 questions.
I'd rather have one at a time, because then the better chance of answering this.
Okay, fine.
yeah, I mean, I agree with lots of that, actually. It's clear that the very existence of kind of concerted government campaigns to manipulate or seek to manipulate the public opinions of the people they represent is a structural issue, clearly, which conspiracy theories arise from.
They very much coincide with the 4 points that you've mentioned. The 4 points you were attributing to conspiracy theorists, delegitimization, and so on.
Very much. I mean, I think it broadly contributes, in my opinion, to the 4th one, the idea of demolishing trust in government and inspiring a kind of whole culture where people see the action of the government as obviously a conspiracy. I mean, I see a very powerful interaction there. Sorry, the reason I interrupted you, and I apologise for doing so before, was over this idea that all conspiracy theories seem to kind of have equal kind of credible truth claims.
Unscannable 33.